Hey guys, and welcome to our newest hackathon on air. Today we're talking about AMP. So we're talking about how to get started, what are the benefits of AMP, how do you actually implement certain features. Today with you is again Dom, Dennis, both from Google in Dublin. We're both mobile UX managers. And as a special guest today, we have invited Ben Morse. He's a developer advocate sitting in the US, and he'll be joining us because he is the expert on AMP, and he's also the host of the AMP Roadshow that some of you probably have heard of. So to talk you a little bit through the agenda, so we're just talking a little bit about benchmarks and what AMP is all about. We will present you also some case studies to show you how AMP works, what are the benefits, what are the results. Then Ben should be joining us live, and he will be here to answer all of your questions. And we have some questions prepared, but if there's anything we don't cover, just type away in the live chat and we'll try to pick it up. And to conclude the session, we're showing you a few simple code examples of how you can get started today. So yeah, the stage is yours, Dennis, and go get started.
Thank you very much, Dom. So just a very quick introduction on what we are talking about, since we called the session Getting Started with AMP. There's probably a few of you who are already familiar with AMP, maybe a few are not, so no worries there. To sum it up really quickly, AMP is an open source initiative, which is powered by Google, but not a Google initiative by any means. It's open source. And it basically targets, the main problems we see with the mobile web these days. It makes landing pages more beautiful, of course, but most of all, it makes it faster. And, mobile friendlier, also in terms of having your mobile payments easier and stuff like that, but more on that later. So just a very quick overview on what AMP is. I think the main USP of AMP is probably the speed. So we can confidently say that AMP pages are 58% faster than regular web pages. So you can see this is the main thing which makes AMP great. It's lightning fast. But moreover, it also has a lot of best practices in terms of design. Of course, it's responsive, but it's not just as responsive, it's also mobile friendly. So it helps you with a lot of stuff in terms of UX, form inputs and stuff like that. It is very easy to test, especially if you use AdWords. You could use a draft and experiments. So if you, after this session, decide to start with your first AMP page, you can basically just recreate your page and then test it on AdWords, your usual old page, and test it towards the AMP page and see if you get more conversions, etc. And of course, it's easy to scale. Well, basically all of our initiatives we're presenting here are made for scale, ideally. So it's another great feature about AMP. So to give you a quick overview on what we are covering today, so I'll probably talk about 10 to 15 minutes now about AMP speed and a few other features. Then I would like to present you with some success stories of customers customers who already implemented AMP. Then hopefully we get Ben live on stream. He will be dialing in from New York. So I think he's on his way to the office now. I hope we get that set up. And Ben, will be here to, basically demystify AMP. So if you already heard about AMP, you probably already have a few questions. We try to come up with the, most frequently asked questions and misconceptions about AMP. But this will also be the time where you can just type away in the chat and ask Ben questions about whatever is interesting you about AMP. And then last but not least, Dom will show you some AMP coding examples, just to, I think, mainly showcase, but correct me if I'm wrong here, Dom, how easy it is to set up your first AMP page, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's really important to understand. Sometimes people think AMP is like a new programming language or a new technology, and therefore has like a pretty steep learning curve. It's actually pretty simple. And we basically show you how to get started as quickly as possible. Obviously, that's going to be very basic examples, but we're also guiding you to resources online where you can get some better information and some, deeper insights in, developing something more complex like an e-commerce page, which is also possible in AMP. So yeah, I think it's going to be super interesting, and we hope you enjoy it. And if you have any questions at any time, please type it in the chat, and we're super happy to pick it up.
Perfect. Okay, let's get started. Well, at last point, of course, at the end, we have another Q&A session. But as I said before, if you have questions, type away in the chat and we'll try and answer them as soon as possible. Yeah. So to give you a quick overview of the benefits of AMP. So first of all, or more as in, why do you need to be fast on mobile? If you're following our episodes, you've probably seen some of the stats, but just to recap, speed is very important. It's not a nice to have, it's more or less a feature. Why is that? Because 75% of mobile sites now take over 10 seconds to load, which is a big problem, especially if you're trying to target new users, because users on mobile, especially on the go, are very impatient. So our stats show that you might be losing up to 53% of your mobile visitors if your site takes longer than 3 seconds to load. This might depend on your vertical a bit. If you're in a highly competitive vertical, this is probably very true. If your users are a bit more price sensitive, they might be willing to wait a bit more. But even if you just lose out on, let's say, 20% of your new customers, which you probably pay advertising money for to get them, well, that's not ideal by any means. And another point is that you see a lot of, a lot of incremental revenue if your site loads faster. In this example, a site that loads in 5 seconds has twice the ad revenue compared to a site which would load in 19 seconds. And let's say 19 seconds sounds a lot here, but it isn't. So, well, I don't know about you, Dom, but I have a few customers. If you look at their loading time, they are around 19 seconds in a 3G network. So it's not super unrealistic to see these numbers, I guess.
No, I totally agree. I think we're all used to fast loading sites, but I think what we often forget is that we're sitting at home in the office. And we're, kind of like logged into the Wi-Fi network, and obviously everything is lightning fast then. But, we do know that, we don't have this last click model anymore where people go on the web and, then they buy. Like, it's a long journey until they make a decision. And often, information is gathered while you're on the go, while you're maybe walking down the high street or while you're on the bus. And if you're like in a 3G network, it's, you experience much slower, network bandwidth, and 19 seconds is something we come across quite frequently. So it's definitely something to keep an eye on and make sure that you're providing your customers a fast experience, wherever they are at the moment.
Yeah, I think this is pretty much the three biggest challenges that AMP now tries to tackle. So first of all, it's the slow loading of sites, which we still see a lot. And also in very mature markets, we're going to show you a few benchmarks later on. Just to prove this is not for smaller markets, this is for really mature markets who make a lot of money in e-commerce or in e-business. So this is probably the first big pillar we try to solve here, is slow loading times or slow loading mobile pages. The other one would be that there's still a lot of pages who are unresponsive, and not just unresponsive in terms of it is not a responsive page in technical terms, but also it is very hard to, for example, do a checkout, buy stuff, have payment on mobile. We see that quite a lot. There's also a few solutions for that, but this is one of the other parts AMP tries to, one of the other challenges AMP tries to tackle. And I think the third part is the content, which is oftentimes displaced by ads, or you have pop-ups and layovers who actually distract from the content of your site, which might not be that crucial on desktop because you have more space to work with, but on mobile it can be super annoying. I guess you know that for yourselves. This is another question we usually get. I think we also talked about this the last time, but it's such a frequent questions I get from my customers that we decided to show you that again, because people like to have benchmarks. I can totally understand it. It's, well, at least some kind of goal you can work towards to. Keep in mind, it's always a bit hard to give general benchmarks because verticals and businesses are very different from each other. So this is more like I'd say a guideline you can work towards to, and that you might want to keep in mind, but not take it with a pinch of salt. That's all I'm saying. In general, we're using speed index for measuring site speed. And well, Dom, do you want to explain really quickly what speed index is and why we're using speed index?
Yeah, I mean, speed index is just, one metric we use to determine how well does a site perform. It basically means, how long does it take for the relevant content, the above default content, to be painted to the screen so that the user gets the feel of completeness and, is able to interact with your site. So it's not so much about the total loading time of your page, because it's totally fine to load, some additional CSS, JavaScript, whatever you require further down the line. But it's really important to get this first paint, on the screen as quickly as possible. And speed index is the metric that measures this.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. So it's more like of a perceived speed for the user, I guess we tend to say, which is probably more important than your overall
exactly.
site
Yeah.
loading.
It's like speed perception, and we actually had a Hackathon on Air session on the psychology of how people perceive speed, and that's kind of like taps into that. So trying to keep the user busy and render something to the page so that the user doesn't feel lost or possibly even thinks that the page is broken.
Okay, let's have a look at the other stats we usually recommend. Another one, just because it's a bit more, the concept's a bit more easy to grasp, like measuring speed can be a bit volatile every once in a while. Total request is very straightforward. So we'd recommend that your total requests on your mobile site should be around 75, let's say 80 requests in total. Just because we see a lot of bloated mobile sites, and which of course affects loading time and also speed index a lot. So try to not bloat your mobile pages wherever it's possible. Save some requests, and which ties into the next concept as well. Save some bytes. Don't have your mobile page too bloated. As a general guidance, we'd say around 1 megabyte would be good for a mobile site, I guess.
Yeah, I mean that would be ideal. I think what's important to add to these benchmarks is those are the benchmarks that we usually recommend for non-AMP pages, right? Yeah. So basically, the beauty of AMP is that it covers all this. So as Dennis will tap into a little bit later, AMP is sort of like a collection of best practices, and those best practices take care of the total number of requests, the page weight, the speed index. So basically it's sort of like a way it's a tool that we give you to achieve those benchmarks in technically the easiest way possible. So I think that's just something to add here. But other than that, yeah, that's totally true. And if possible, you should aim for those targets. Although, as Dennis said, take it with a pinch of salt. Sometimes it's not possible depending on how complex your site is.
Okay. So yeah, we also mentioned that before, just to give you an idea. I hope you can see that on the screen. I hope it's not too small. If it is, I also put a short link down there for you. Some benchmarks for maybe or hopefully your market. I think just to sum it up, almost every vertical is pretty far away from the best practices we would recommend. There's a few who's doing better, a few who's doing worse, which is mostly due to they probably need a more complex site. If you, let's say, compare e-commerce to a lead gen site, it's probably easier for a lead generation site to have like a less bloated site, because usually they don't need as much features as e-commerce do. So that's, well, tying back again to don't take the stats too serious. But here you have a benchmark, how you might stack up as well in your own vertical and also in your own market. So what you see on the screen now would be Germany. But if you open the link down there, please keep in mind it's case sensitive, but you can just type it in. Then you will also see stats for the US and for UK. So two other very mature markets where we also see that it's a bit behind what we would like to have mobiles, or where we would like to have mobile sites at the moment. And this is pretty much what AMP can do for you. So if you keep in mind all the stats we've just shown you, if you look at the medium load time of an AMP page, we're under 1 second. So this basically means it's 4 times faster and it's 10 times less data. But not compromising on the quality or on the features you can show or provide your customers with. So I think this sums it up very good what AMP can do for you. And I'd say, well, not too much implementation effort you have to put in, right, Tom?
Yeah, I think I think it's true, and I think it's really important to stress that AMP doesn't really limit you in any way. I mean, obviously there's certain things that you have restrictions on, like custom JavaScript or too much CSS, but usually this is not a limitation. It's more like a help to maybe find a slightly different solution, but you will have the same end result. As I said earlier, there are e-commerce shops that are built in like in AMP, and when you think about like a product page with maybe a carousel and an accordion, like a light box, whatever you kind of think about when you think about a product page on an e-commerce site, you can do that in AMP. So I personally really feel you're not limited. You're just reminded to not put everything on the table that's sort of like you can think of, but rather be a little bit more be a little bit more careful, what you use, why you use it, and maybe there are better ways of solving like a certain problem.
Yeah, makes sense. I guess it's more like prioritizing a little bit which features you really need, I guess, and not to sacrifice too much of speed for maybe features you don't even need or who's not really working towards your conversion rates, etc.
Exactly.
Cool. Yeah, so this is also more of a high-level overview why AMP or what AMP is. And there are 3 big components, I guess, which make AMP so fast. One of them is, AMP HTML. The other one would be the AMP JS, which is, correct me if I'm wrong here, Dom, but not too different from like what you would expect from traditional HTML and JavaScript, is it?
I mean, AMP HTML is basically, you can use almost all tags that you're used to using in JavaScript, in HTML, like all elements. And then we have some custom ones. So for example, instead of using the image tag, you would use the AMP minus image tag, which is slightly different. But as I said before, it's not a steep learning curve. It's just allowing us to better understand your content and better work out what is what should we prioritize, what is important to the user and what is not. And AMP.js is basically, we have a base JavaScript library that gives you certain features. For example, built-in lazy loading, which all comes with the base, the base JS file, and then you add some, sort of like extended components, which is an additional JavaScript file that allows you, for example, to use forms on your AMP page, to use a gallery, to use, web fonts. And the great thing about it is that all the JS is loaded async, which means that you're not blocking the rendering path, but rather, you're loading it synchronously, and then you only stop the rendering for the execution. And of course, last but not least, the AMP cache, which is one of the main reasons why it's so lightning fast. And I'm sure we might have some questions on that, and Ben is the guy that will give you some cool insights about that.
Yeah, definitely. I hope so. Yeah, I think this is also a question I tend to get from my customers. Is there a big difference in terms of if I hand tune my site, meaning well, I highly optimize it for speed versus AMP? Can I achieve the same here? I usually tend to say yes, you can, but you're still missing out on the AMP cache. So this is probably the extra feature who comes on top with AMP, and well, you probably won't get the same results from a hand-tuned site that you would get from an AMP cached site. So as we said, an AMP cached site can load almost instantly.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it is possible, but considering, or looking at how modern sites are built with usually a lot of JavaScript, possibly some jQuery, it's rather tricky. So I personally think that using AMP to speed up your site is the easier solution than fine-tuning your own pages, especially because, and I think that's always important to mention, is AMP is standalone. So you're not actually tweaking the code of your website. So you're not tapping into anything that you could potentially break, but you're basically building a standalone page. And I think that is the beauty of it, that you speed up your site, yet you leave the core code of your site basically untouched, and you just add some canonicals so that we understand, okay, there's an AMP page to this HTML page, and vice versa.
Makes sense. So let's have a look. What makes AMP so fast? I think, well, we already touched on a few of these points, and you also mentioned in the beginning. Also, if you have been following our previous episodes here, you will probably recognize a few of the best practices we try to highlight. They are already built in the AMP framework, more or less. You already mentioned async JavaScript. This would probably be one of our go-to recommendations, which we touched upon in previous episodes. Well, ideally, don't load JavaScript in the head because it's render blocking, of course. Try to move it to the footer and, well, defer it or load it async. Also, in terms of don't bloat up your site with too much CSS. So we have some restrictions there. So it's more or less, as you said before, a bunch of web best practices, I would say.
Yeah, exactly.
Would you agree?
Yeah, totally agree. It's not rocket science. It's just really reminding you to be careful about what you use, why you use it, and how much you use of, let's say, CSS or JavaScript.
Well, here we have it again. So yeah, AMP is just a bunch of web best practices, you can say, including, well, the AMP cache, which then, in conclusion, leads to this, instant experience for your users. Another point, which is a question I tend to get a lot, and you mentioned this a little bit, or tapped into this a little bit, is it hard to develop a site? We have this stat here, which says 80% of development teams build an AMP landing page in 1 week. But I've attended hackathons with you, and we had teams there who build an AMP page actually in 1 day. So of course, it depends a bit on what kind of site you try to rebuild. But in general, what is your opinion on developing an AMP site? If you're, let's say, a lead gen, you're a lead gen site, and what would you say? How long would it take to build an AMP site?
Yeah, I mean, it totally depends on the complexity of the site. As you said, we constantly run hackathons in EMEA and MENA, and we see developers build it within a day. It really depends what you require. Obviously, if you're having a slightly more complex page, like an e-commerce shop where you want to develop AMP pages for, it might take some more time because you need to use a bit more like some more extended components. But in general, it's pretty straightforward, and we have some great resources online that I will talk about a little later. One of them is ampbyexample.com, which basically shows you exactly how you do certain things, how you implement certain components, what are the restrictions. So it's very quick to learn, very quick to pick up and to develop. And as I said, I think one of the big benefits is it's standalone, so you can really play around a little bit without sort of being afraid of breaking anything. And I think that's always really important, because I totally understand, if you're running a big shop, you don't want to tweak your templates, risking maybe that, users won't be able to check out, or whatever risks you're facing. So AMP is standalone, and you can just kind of like hack it a little bit and just see what you can come up with. And once you feel confident that that it's working for you, you can reference it in the canonical, and then you're good to go.
That sounds really cool. Well, to close this part, let me show you a few AMP success stories we collected. So there's not a few, there's quite a lot of people already actually who started experimenting with AMP sites. So I guess you've heard about this. This is, if you want to call it a vertical, the one vertical as in publishers who started first. I'd say mostly because they're used to be in a very high competitive environment, and people used to read news on the go. This is probably one of the main use cases for your phone, next to others, of course. But publishers started very early on amping their pages, and I guess you probably have seen that whatever your favorite digital newspaper or publisher is, it's very likely that they already have an AMP page. So this was probably the one first big use case we found in the beginning, and where we found a lot of early adopters and publishers. You can see a few stats here. I don't want to get into it too deep, but all of our publishers here saw great improvements in their KPIs, whatever KPIs they were using and was important for them. But they saw great improvement in that, because especially in this vertical, or I'd say speed is very, very important.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm just having a glimpse at the live chat, and I see Joachim's question, how to tag your AMP site with canonical versus desktop version. If I understand correctly, you're asking how to implement a canonical when you're running or like on the desktop version of your website. I think maybe hopefully going into the right direction here. If not, just put another comment online in the chat. But I think one misperception is that AMP is mobile only, and it's actually not. Ben will actually talk about that. So like, there's you can totally reference the AMP page from your desktop site, because AMP also works on desktop. So there's no limitation there. But should that not 100% address your question, then I'm sure Ben will have some more information on that. But I hope that sort of like answers what you were trying to ask.
Okay. So as we just touched upon, publishers, that is, our number one use case for AMP. But of course, AMP is not only for publishers. There's another question we tend to get a lot. Is AMP ready for e-commerce? I think we can confidently say, yes, it is. There's a ton of new features which came out over the last few months, which were specifically targeted towards e-commerce to support crucial e-commerce functions that you just need on your site if you want to have a nice experience for your customers. So here's a few examples we brought with you from like big e-commerce sites. I guess very well known eBay or AliExpress. I think eBay now has 15 million pages amped already. Big number there. So yeah, it is ready for e-commerce. And I think Dom will maybe and Ben will show us some features what is new and what makes it more feasible for e-commerce, I guess.
Yep.
And here, just to round it up as well, we now have over 4 billion mobile pages that are amped and millions of domains globally. So it's not early adopter anymore by any means, and it's not future technology. I think it's definitely the time now to think about AMP, I guess. What is your opinion on that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, if you're confident that you sort of like optimized your site as much as possible, and you're looking at the next step, or if you say it's maybe a little too complicated to optimize my pages for certain reasons, then AMP could also be a great solution. So yeah, it's definitely not in its early stages anymore. It's well adopted. We see promising results, and we definitely hope that, more of you, give it a try and, just test it out and see that, the loading times you can achieve with AMP are usually so much quicker than what you could achieve on your own website.
Perfect. Yeah, this is one use case I brought for you, which is a mobile, like an agency specialized in mobile, also helping their clients with amping their sites, mostly e-commerce sites, and they have great success for this with this. So this is another, well, let's say use case for AMP. If you're tuning in as an agency, this might be another interesting USP you could also offer for your customers, helping them in amping a site. And they've seen great results here. So they have conversion rate increasements of 105% for the AMP pages. The bounce rate, of course, this is one of our go-to stats we always mention, because speed is really narrowly tied to bounce rate. And the CTR also went up. So it's a great use case for e-commerce, but of course for other verticals as well. Yeah, so another mention, so you see there's a lot of text on this slide. If you want to have more information about, well, AMP in general, of course, use cases and success stories, we recommend to go to ampproject.org. This is your, well, go-to hub where you will be linked to other sites as well. I think you can basically find everything what is important about AMP there. I think another fun fact as well, this site is purely made with AMP as well. So, and you can use it on your desktop, which again proves that it's not just a mobile-only solution.
Exactly. So it's ampproject.org or ampbyexample.com. Both great resources to get some more information on AMP and view some great tutorials.
Cool. So I'm guessing Ben is still stuck in traffic. So we might want to switch over to our live coding examples, Dan, and wait for Ben and just having in our Q&A session. I hope you'll make it.
Yeah, I think Ben actually notified us just a couple seconds ago, and he said he will have some great stories on trains in the US versus trains in Germany. So I'm like quite interested to see what he will be able to tell us. So yeah, so let's just jump ahead and go into like a few AMP coding examples while we're waiting for Ben. So again, it's going to be very high level. So we're just trying to show you how to get started, what to watch out for, and then I'll give you the links to where you can actually get some more information, including tutorials, and an overview over which components exist, etc. So let's start with this slide. So that, how do you actually start your first AMP page? Again, it's very straightforward. So basically, there are a few tweaks that you have to do and a few rules to follow. But once you do so, you're basically ready to go. So the one thing is that to the HTML tag, you have to add, a little something, which is either going to be the lightning, or you can also just write HTML AMP, which basically just says, okay, this is going to be an AMP page, so that we know, okay, how to handle this specific page. The second thing you then need to do, which is very important, and the order is very important, is that you need to define the character set as the first child of the head tag. So that's very important. If you don't do that, it's going to be invalid and it would not be picked up as an AMP page. So that's very important that only those pages that are valid AMP are going to be picked up as an AMP page. So make sure that you declare the the char set, or like define the char set as the first child. Third, you need to include the AMP base library, which we touched earlier. It's basically enabling you to use some of the AMP features, for example, images in AMP, and it allows you to basically add some extended components. So it's sort of like the extended components would have the AMP library as a dependency. What's important about the AMP base library is it must be loaded the second child of the head tag. So it's very important to keep that order to ensure that it's valid. Now we're coming back to the canonicals. So what you need to do is, so that we know there is an AMP page, you need to actually add a canonical that points to the regular HTML file. That's very, very important, so that we know, okay, there's an HTML file, but we also know there's an AMP file, so that we can pick up the correct page if we when we crawl your site. And now there's one thing that could happen is that you say, look, I might just develop my entire site in AMP, which is totally fine. You can do that. And in this case, you will still need a canonical. However, in the case of an AMP only page, you just point it to itself. So again, either point it to the regular HTML file or point it to itself. Now, AMP HTML also requires a viewport declaration, just as shown. So you add the meta tag, name viewport, and then we recommend the initial scale set to 1. This is not required, but it's recommended. So I would highly suggest to just do it like that. Now, the next thing would be that you probably want to have some custom CSS. And as we touched earlier, because it's a bunch of best practices, all CSS needs to be inline. The reason for that is just simply that each server request adds adds additional loading time to your page. We try to avoid that, so we want to load CSS inline. And in order to not sort of like blow up that document, we limit the amount of CSS to 50 kilobytes, which is more than enough to develop even complex sites. Usually CSS is just bloated because kind of like a lot of teams working on it, and it's maybe a few years old, and so it kind of like gets bigger because there's not enough maintenance and cleaning being done. 50 kilobyte is more than enough. And last but not least, you're gonna add the AMP boilerplate, which basically adds some general styling that allows you to implement features. So think of it as sort of like a framework, and then with the custom CSS, you can tweak it a little bit to match your current design. This is your first AMP page. So once you have included that, you can go ahead and just use very common elements such as an H1 tag, or a paragraph, or whatever you're used to. However, be aware that there are going to be some custom elements. For example, for images, I'm going to speak about that in a little bit. So when developing a page, always have a look at the tutorials and the documentation and see, oh, can I actually use this element, or is there a custom element for it? In most cases, you should be fine using the elements you're used to, but just have a look and be safe. And yeah, when you do that, then basically you have your first hello world in AMP. And I see Ben just joined, which we're really excited about.
Good to see you guys.
Hi, Ben. Cool. Thanks you make it. Yeah, I think I'd suggest we just go through our coding examples really quickly, and then we'll have our Q&A with you, if that's fine for you.
Whatever you like, yeah. And we'll discuss all the differences between trains in Germany and trains in the US, where they're often canceled, don't run on time, and so on and so forth. But yeah, go on, and I'll just kind of follow along and let me know what I can do.
Perfect.
Okay,
so
perfect.
We just go through a few more slides. I think it's in 4 in total, and then we have our Q&A with Ben, which is really exciting. So just to wrap it up, the first, kind of like hello world in AMP, it's pretty straightforward. If you follow the steps from the previous slide, you will have an outcome that looks something like that. And as you can see, we're following the rules to have the character set defined as a first child. Then we have the AMP base JavaScript. We have our canonical. We have the viewport declaration, and then we just go along with some custom CSS. And as you see here, this is where it slightly differs. So instead of like having just the image tag, you have like the AMP-image tag. And talking about the components, because I touch it quite a bit. So AMP comes with a lot of exciting components that allows you to build even complex pages. Some of them are built-in. So they're basically built in the base library, which I already talked about, for example, the amp-image. Then we have some extended components, which is something like AMP analytics or fonts. So if you want to use custom fonts, or if you want to use Google Analytics on your AMP page, the extended components will allow you to do so, and we show you how that works. And then we got some experimental components which are not ready to use yet. You're more than welcome to play around with them, but they're not ready for wide use. So it's a bit like in experimental mode. And I guess like one question we get quite frequently is, how to actually add Google Analytics to an AMP page. And so we just want to quickly show you how that works. So again, as I said earlier, AMP or Google Analytics requires the AMP Analytics extended component, which means that you have to add an additional JavaScript file to your document. In this case, it would be this snippet that you see here. And again, it needs to be explicitly included. If it's not, then it wouldn't work. Then the second thing you would need to do is to enable the built-in support for Google Analytics, you would need to set the type attribute to Google Analytics. That's really important, in order to, to tell AMP Analytics that you want to use Google Analytics. And then all you have to do is to replace, obviously, the property ID to something that you own. So like a valid property ID, and don't leave it at XXXXXY. And then really important, you want to add trigger requests, and the values that are supported are page view, event, and social. So in this case, in this example, we use the page view request. So this will be able to, to let you track the number of page views that you receive on your AMP page. And if you want to get some more information on how that works and what do I do in case I want to use like the event request or the social request, then I created this short link here which guides you to the correct page, and it's going to be the Google short domain and then XS4MCR. And obviously you can always go back into the slides and copy paste the URL later on. Great.
Also, that analytics support in AMP is always growing, and you also can not just add analytics for page views and so on. You can also add it in the ways that you like, so that, for example, when a user presses a button or taps something, analytics also gets hit, and also Google Tag Manager is supported.
I think that's a really important piece of information, because people are often, a little bit worried that, there's some sort of limitation in terms of using Google Analytics. But Ben, as you just said, so I guess it's evolving quite quickly. And so would you say like that for the majority of the things that you want to get done with Google Analytics, AMP is ready for it already?
I think so, yeah. I mean, it does the things other analytics environments would do. It supports all the major providers. Those are not supported. You can make your own components and add things to AMP. People have trouble sometimes with some backwards compatibility. Sometimes Omniture apparently gives results that are surprising when it's attached to events instead of attached to page views. But the various problems are being worked out. And yeah, it's much easier also than doing HTML. Everything is built into a component, so there's no adding JavaScript to the page. It's just simpler. It tends to work, in my experience, quite reliably in the vast majority of cases.
That sounds great. So yeah, I mean, super excited to hear that. So as you can see, there are just a few limitations here. The link will still point you to some more information, but there's so much documentation out there already. And again, like if you have any question, just put it in the comments. We're trying to pick up as many questions as we can in the FAQ session. To just move forward with what else you can do. Obviously, you want to include images into your AMP page, which is sort of like a basic requirement. And it's pretty straightforward as well. So the only difference at first is that you don't use just the image element, but you rather use the AMP-image element. And then what's really important is that you need to define a width and a height of the image, because we want to know like how to render the page beforehand. So that's very important to to add the width and the height attribute. Now, probably most of you say, okay, but just having sort of like a static image is not enough. I want to have a responsive image. And I think what's great about AMP is that that is even easier probably than in most cases when you just build a regular page. Because by adding the layout attribute and setting it to responsive, you're automatically creating a responsive image, which is super cool. And I just played around with it a little bit earlier, and it works like a charm. However, that doesn't mean that you're just sort of like limited to just have one image version on your AMP page, because we totally understand that you might require several versions depending on the resolution of your device. So AMP does not limit you on using, for example, source set. You're still able to do that. You can also use the sizes attribute. So as it's shown here, you can just use source set and then specify the image usage based on the screen width. So everything is the same as you would do it on your regular page. And there's actually a really handy tutorial on how to do that. And again, we created a short link. It's capital H, F, capital R, capital X, C6, where you literally are guided step by step through the process of implementing an image and how to use source sets or sizes, to make it work in the best possible way and really keep an eye on performance depending on the screen width. So this is really exciting. And again, I think it's even easier than working with responsive images on a non-AMP page. And last but not least, I think that's one common question we especially get from lead generation sites. It's, can I actually use forms on an AMP page? And the good news is, yes, you can. Again, for AMP forms is an extended component. So what that means is that you need to add another JavaScript file to your page. It would be the snippet here. So you see it here, it's loaded async again, so it's not blocking the rendering path, which is really important. So you just you need to explicitly include this. And now you have two ways of embedding forms. Just as you know it, there is the form submission with the page update, and there's a form submission with the page reload. And you can do it like that. So for example, you can use the method attribute and set it to get. Then you define the action attribute, and basically that will allow you to submit the form, and you will land on the page that you specified where the user should land on. So let it be like a search field or simply a form submission. Whatever you need to use a form for, you can use it just as you're used to. What's important, you do need the target attribute, and you need to set it to top or blank, otherwise it won't work. And then for those of you that say, well, I rather want to have, like the page reload, so like the Ajax way, you can do that as well. So you can use, instead of like using method get, you would use method post. And then instead of the action attribute, you would use the action minus XHR attribute. And then again, you specify the server endpoint, and then you are able to, have the form submission while staying on the same page. Now, some of you might say like, well, but how do I notify the user if something went wrong or something, or if the form was submitted successfully? There's also a component for that, and I believe it's called AMP mustache, which allows you to define specific messages to the user to allow to communicate to the user, which is really important because we're talking also about UX, and without communicating to the user if something was successful or non-successful, obviously it would be quite pointless to have a form on your page. The last thing to mention about forms is that form submissions on AMP require security, which means your page needs to be secured with SSL. I think that is probably an important point about an AMP page, but it's an important point in general. We all want to be safe on the web. So like, that is required, and I think that's a good thing. So that is no limitation by any means.
That's there. A couple of points on that. I want to add to that. Yeah, AMP Mustache is your general way to get templates to get content onto your page. So AMP Mustache is your templating system, the standard Mustache templating, but in AMP. Also, as he's pointing out, forms are really important. And when AMP first came out, I want to mention there were no forms. People still think sometimes AMP doesn't have forms. I can't make my e-commerce site with AMP because there are no forms. Well, not true. There's forms on AMP. And you can't control the forms like you can normally, but all this stuff is built into forms you wouldn't usually get. A lot of forms have done a very good validation, for example, don't look very good. AMP forms, you have built-in user validation. You're asking for a number. They put in a bunch of other things that aren't numbers. It will gently tell the user that in beautiful text, let them correct it. There's now a date picker. There's a lot of stuff that makes the forms in AMP beautiful, easy for users, and stylable by you. So they're really nice now.
Cool, perfect. Well, I think that's a good, a good thing to start our Q&A now. I guess you're done, Dom, right? So I suggest we'll start with some questions we have prepared for you, Ben, and then we'll see if there's a few more questions on the chat as well. And you just throw your knowledge at us.
Well, I'll try to have some knowledge first to throw at you. Yeah, I am Ben Morse. I'm a developer advocate here at Google, working on making the web better for everybody, making the web easy for users, web easy for developers, focusing on AMP these days. And on Twitter, it's BENMORSS. Sorry, go ahead.
No worries. We can also add that to our description later on, where we also want to add our general event page, as well as a few of the sources we just shown you, or Dom just showed you. So yeah, Ben, let's start our AMP Demystified session. I hope we don't have too much trouble with the sound. I heard it might be a bit tricky, but so if you're in the chat and you're experiencing sound issues, just let us know and we'll try to come up with a solution. So Ben, to put you on the spot, first question I would think of from a user's point of view, or a developer's point of view, or marketeer's point of view, would be: will AMP work with my existing content management systems? And is there probably is built-in plugins and stuff like that. But can you touch a little bit upon what there is, if there's any challenges, etc.?
Yeah, that's a really important question, because a lot of sites use CMSs. I think that the last stat I saw was that 30% of sites are built on WordPress. So CMSs are really important. It's a work in progress. There's plugins out there for most of the major CMSs. So WordPress has a couple of plugins, for example. I know Drupal has a plugin, that Magento has one, e-commerce systems. There are plugins for most systems, but if you just stick a plugin into your existing CMS for AMP and just say you're done, you're liable to be disappointed, because the plugin will probably be missing some things. I've seen cases where people use a WordPress plugin, for example, and the site looks okay, but it has no menu anymore. And people just go ahead and put it live, and they're surprised when it doesn't do as well as their previous pages, but there's no menu, so that's not going to be really a great user experience. So use the plugins, and then check your site, and then customize afterwards. That's really important, to use the plugins, and then check the result, of course, and customize until it's just as good as your existing page. There's very few reasons to have an AMP page that looks any worse than page. No reasons, actually. Maybe a couple of features can't be implemented as easily or aren't worth doing because they're more difficult. But most things are much easier, and it should look just as good. Also, look for changes in the near future. We're helping out with the WordPress effort. We're working on a new plugin for WordPress with people from Automatic and other places. Other plugins are being worked on by various people around the world. So I'd look for some nice things happening with plugins for CMSs, especially WordPress, in the next 2 or 3 months. Also, of course, you should get involved, make it better. You could become an important person in the world of CMSs and the world of AMP, and you'll get personal glory.
Well, that's always nice.
And I think that was a really important thing to mention, because Dennis touched it earlier that, you know, AMP is an open source project. So I think it's really important that, you know, we want to work with you as a developer and with, you know, many developers all over the world on making AMP better, rather than providing this sort of solution to developers as like, this is the Google solution, right, Ben?
Right, that's the exact idea, because I mean, you know your sites more than we do, of course. Google doesn't want to prescribe what people should do. Google's trying to help in this case because performance has been a problem on the web for a long time, and on mobile phones especially. This is just a crazy new idea to actually make performance better, but it's been really popular. And yeah, it belongs to everybody. So it's not Google AMP, it's AMP, and work on it, make it better. If you have suggestions or ideas, especially, go on GitHub and suggest these things to us, or go on Twitter and tell us. The AMP team is very, very responsive and loves to hear feedback. This is really true. And people love to make new components or enhance existing components to meet use cases.
Cool. Maybe let's take a quick question from the chat. So Zacharias is asking, is it necessary to migrate all pages of a site to start with AMP? Ben, you want to take this?
Okay. No, it is not necessary. I mean, AMP is just stuff that lives in HTML. It's just JavaScript, you know, some CSS, HTML extensions, things like that. So there's no reason for that. The best thing to do is take the pages where users get there first, maybe where they arrive from search, because then the AMP cache can fall into play. So, you know, start with your landing pages, those kinds of things, make those AMP, and then just go from there. It's easy to link out of AMP back to HTML, back and forth if you want to. There's no reason you have to really stay in one world. They're all just web pages, really.
That's great. And another question that we get quite frequently, or it's a concern rather, that, you know, developers ask us, will AMP limit my layout and design options? Or they're worried that it limits the options too much. What is your stand on that?
Well, the CSS still belongs to you. You get 50,000 bytes of CSS still. And I've never seen a site that needs more than that. I mean, if you've got a bunch of frameworks lying around your CSS, you might have more than that, but you really never need to. And you honestly shouldn't have to. And you control the CSS. So yeah, go for it. The only thing I can think of that could be a limit are if you do things that we consider to be bad user experiences. So if it's really important for you to have things that fly around the screen, take over the screen, things that just are unpleasant for users, then those can be hard to duplicate in AMP because there are some restrictions. Otherwise, it's your CSS. So same stuff, same design possibilities.
Okay, I think the next question we prepared is a bit, well, it ties to a question from the chat as well. Can you tell us a bit about limitations? A question in the chat would be, is there, for example, database concerns, like does it work with MySQL and stuff like this? Our question would also be, can you recreate more tricky features, as in carousels, accordions, let's say stuff that marketeers really like?
Taking the last question first, because I just heard it last for some odd reason. I'm answering it first. Yeah, accordions, there's the AMP accordion component. For image carousels and image sliders, there's the AMP carousel. So we know those things are popular. They're built into AMP. There's a lot of effects and things that you can do with AMP, including flying carpet things and parallax things. And some of the fancier things you see on websites already are AMP components. If there are things you can't do, you know, make them, let us know, let the AMP team know. Back to the first question, databases and so on. Your backend won't change. So your backend code can be whatever it was before, just the front end will have AMP HTML instead of regular HTML. So yeah, MySQL, whatever you want to use in the backend is totally up to you and totally unchanged. I feel free to also add to my comments here. I may be missing important things.
No, that's great. And I think like the next question that we prepared sort of like, you know, is a good like sort of like continuation. So What about dynamic content? Can I use dynamic content using AMP, or is it just static? What are my limitations here?
I'm glad you asked that question, because AMP was designed for static pages. And actually, there's a post we have still on our site that I found last week, going through ampproject.org. It's a post by Malte Ubel, kind of the inventor of AMP, saying, this is the idea, it's for static pages. And it was, because you can do more with performance on static pages, and it was an easy way to start and good enough for publishers then. But that's totally changed. We have now AMP lists, we have AMP bind, AMP live lists, AMP mustache, as you were saying before, Dominic. There's various ways to make dynamic content on AMP. And we're seeing an increasing number of verticals adopting AMP, different kinds of applications we never saw before. Plenty of e-commerce things happening out there. You can do things like you can have a thing where a user clicks something and what's on the screen changes. Or they do something and something gets pulled from the server and gets put onto the page. So for example, search auto-completion, that's possible now. So we're seeing that you can do most of the things that most web pages do now in AMP, and there are fewer and fewer limits. There's still some, but much less than people think.
Well, that's cool. I think next question is a bit broader. Could you tell us a bit, because you're very close with the AMP team, what's next on the roadmap? Of course, there's also stuff that hopefully will surprise us, being developed by non-AMP team members. But
yeah.
Can you give us a little glimpse into the future here?
There's always a lot happening with AMP, and yeah, things are always going on. Some things that come to mind immediately are infinite scroll of various sorts is being worked on. I know a new lightbox is being worked on. A lot of new ad stuff is being worked on. We know that there are those who want different kinds of ads and things like header bidding, and those things are being worked on. A lot of e-commerce type things, a lot of things to make dynamic pages more possible and easier are also being worked on. There's some stuff that also help out with migrating your CSS from your past site, some stuff for React, a lot of new templates coming up on AMP Start, I think. And yeah, I think actually maybe in some ways, most importantly, working really hard on CMS support. I'm sure there's a lot more than that going on, but that's what came to mind there spontaneously. Oh, I think there's a date picker also, a new date picker that I've seen some mocks of that looks really promising.
Cool. That's really cool. So yeah, I mean, as I mentioned earlier, there are a lot of resources and tutorials online. Probably the two sites that come into my mind is AMP by example, which is just kind of like a really good way to get started because it walks you through each step for almost each component that we have, and then the ampproject.org domain, of course. But we also heard that there is some AMP roadshow happening, and maybe you want to talk a little bit about that, because that sounds pretty exciting.
Interesting. I heard the same thing, actually. But before I mention that, I also want to mention that ampstart.com is a great way to actually get started with AMP. AMP Start contains templates of various sorts that are really nice. And the thing with AMP is it doesn't really come with design, but AMP Start does. So if you want to make a nice accordion that is already styled to look nicely by some of the best designers I can think of, go to AMP Start and just copy and paste the code and start with that. The AMP Roadshow, yes. So we've been going around the world talking about AMP with people and learning about what people want to use from AMP. We're trying to convey what AMP does now and all of AMP's new features, but also trying to learn from you about what you want from AMP, problems you're having or feature requests you might have. So people were they were in Indonesia and I think Sydney and some other places in October. We're going to be going to 4 European cities in November. We're going to Munich, Madrid, Paris, and London. I'll be there for those. And then if you're elsewhere in the world, we'll be visiting some places in China in December, and then South America in January. And eventually we're going to go to the US, the United States. Where here the trains run very poorly, but there are still plenty of AMP users in this country over here. So yeah, just check out Google AMP Roadshow. Come visit us. Come say hello wherever you are. We want to meet you.
And is it generally open to everyone to attend? Do you need to register? What is the process here to actually attend one of these events?
There is indeed a link to register on the site. You also can go to, I think that ampproject.org have a link to the AMP Roadshow as well. I'm checking it out over here.
Yeah, it does.
Okay, thank you. A Google AMP Roadshow. Will I find links to the Roadshow? I think I've done this before. Yes, look at the SEO here. It's the first results. So yeah, check out AMP Roadshow, please.
Perfect. Yeah, I think with that, we're almost out of time. I'll have one final look at the chat and see if there's any questions we haven't touched on. But I'd say for now, we answered most of it.
Yeah, maybe the first question, I'm not sure if we actually have an average, but I mean, we do know the median load time on an AMP page is 0.9 seconds. And Asher Cry was asking if we know the average load time for a video AMP page. Do we have any benchmarks on that yet, or anything you can tell us about this?
I guess it depends on the page. I mean, the general question. But yeah, video, I mean, it will involve loading a bit of JavaScript for the video, but yeah, the video itself is a whole other issue because it doesn't load till you play it probably. So yeah, so I guess the best answer is it depends.
Always a good answer.
Thank you. My favorite answer.
Great. Is there anything you would like to add, Ben, besides the roadshow and the stuff you touched upon?
I think you guys covered it really well. Just I could say also that AMP, as it kind of gets, it gets more mature and becomes more full featured, we're seeing it used more and more, not just for mobile or as an alternative to web pages, but as general. So think about AMP also as just a web components library, just a way to make web pages which is simpler, which is easier. There are some restrictions, but it's just a lot simpler. People often are able to make an AMP page in a day and convert an entire site in 1 to 4 weeks. So it's pretty quick, it's pretty easy to use, and it's just a way you can make websites more easily in general. It happens to be useful on mobile, especially because of AMP caches and Google's AMP carousel and things like that. And because I think web load time is often worse on mobile than on desktop. But yeah, it's just a generally useful library for making web pages.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Ben, for tuning in. I hope the US trains will get better and faster like AMP.
So too. Thanks for having me.
Definitely thanks for making the time. We know you're really busy. And so, yeah, we really appreciate it. And we're looking forward to see you on this side of the world for the AMP Roadshow.
Yeah, that'll be fun. Yeah.
And yeah, so like, guys, if you have any questions, you can still let us know in the chat, and we will, try to answer all of them. We will be able to connect to Ben and see if we get some more crucial information out of him. And so, yeah, please feel free to comment and definitely tune in next month to our next Hackathon on Air. And I'm sure in the future, Ben, we will welcome you again if AMP continues to develop as quickly as it has in the past. So yeah, thanks a lot.
I appreciate that. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much, Ben, and well, see you soon in Munich for me. That is.
Yeah. See you in a couple weeks.
Yeah. Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Take care.